Welcome back to Bullseye Breakdown. I'm Dustin Weaver, your host, and I'm so excited for you to be here today. We're starting this episode off a little bit differently with a small disclaimer, because oftentimes in business, you're put in a position where you may need to pivot. We're no different. We started this podcast off under a different moniker. We called it Hitting the Mark. And it wasn't until we got a few episodes in the can that we realized that there was already a Hitting the Mark in the space. And rather than take away from what Fabian Gerhalter and his team were doing, we rebranded as Bullseye Breakdown. I'm explaining this because the episode that's coming up is actually one of those first episodes, so you may hear Hitting the Mark throughout it. We didn't want to confuse you, and we definitely wanted to air the episode because the guest is so insightful and has so many great things to say. That said, we hope you enjoy the show. Let's get into it. This is the Bullseye Breakdown. Welcome to the Bullseye Breakdown, the podcast where CEOs, founders, and leaders of industry break down big decisions, big wins, and big lessons. No fluff, just real talk. Let's get into it. This is the Bullseye Breakdown. All right, picture this. You're fresh out of the Marines. You've served 3 tours in Iraq. You've got discipline in your bones and a fire in your gut. But instead of taking the easy road, you decide to do something completely different. You build a distillery. And not just any distillery, the first combat-disabled, veteran-owned distillery in the United States. That's exactly what today's guest, Travis Barnes, did when he founded Hotel Tango Distillery. And let me tell you, this guy didn't just enter the whiskey game. He stormed in with military precision. Today, Hotel Tango is in 23 states, over 120 military bases, and making some of the most innovative spirits on the market. But how do you go from battlefield to boardroom? What's it like launching a brand in one of the most competitive industries in the world? And what does distilled with discipline really mean when it comes to building a business? We're getting into all of it today. Building a brand, overcoming challenges, scaling the right way, and we may even talk a little bit about whiskey. So grab a glass, sit back, and get ready for one hell of a conversation. Let's get into it. This is Hitting the Mark with Travis Barnes. Travis, welcome to Hitting the Mark. We're recording this episode in the morning, so I think it would not necessarily be kosher for us to be sitting here sipping on whiskey. We really planned this wrong, didn't we, Travis?
To each their own, I suppose. I've certainly tasted earlier than this.
I'm so super excited to hear about your story. I want to start by just getting an idea of your background. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to starting Hotel Tango?
Sure. I graduated high school in May of 2001, started college that fall. 9/11 happened, and I felt the calling. I dropped out of college a few weeks later and enlisted in the infantry in the United States Marine Corps. While I was in infantry training, after boot camp, I got selected for Marine Recon. From there, I got assigned to 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, where I ended up doing 3 tours, all in Iraq. I did the initial kickoff in 2003, and then 2 follow-on tours in Fallujah and Ramadi. Came back home. I knew that after that, I had the opportunity to re-enlist, but I knew where that was going to end up, right back in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I was pretty tired of being shot at, and I said, I want to go back home, and I think that I can do more to help people there. And so I went back, finished up my undergrad, and ended up getting into law school. And I thought, at that point, I would move back to my small town in Northeast Indiana and become a public defender or something like that. And while I was there, 2 things happened. I met my wife, and I also was paying attention to the state legislature. I'd been making beer as a hobby for several years, and they'd been kicking around opening up artisan distilling for a few years. And in 2013, they finally passed the law that allowed for artisan makers to produce bourbon, whiskey, spirits, I guess, generally in the state for the first time since Prohibition. Now, that's not to say that Indiana has not had a very long and illustrious history of bourbon making going back, all the way to, 1500s, and then through Prohibition, and then post-Prohibition, the old Seagram's plant in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, has been operating almost continuously for 100 years at this point. One of the biggest kind of industrial complexes in the country that most folks don't know about, but it became the MGP plant, which is a kind of massive bourbon production facility within the United States that a ton of brands use MGP whiskey bourbon put it in their bottle.
It's interesting to think that, people, when you think of whiskey as just a general populace, you immediately go to, oh, well, that's got to be made in Tennessee or Kentucky.
They did a great job of monopolizing the market. During Prohibition, the U.S. Congress allowed 7 distilleries to continue manufacturing medicinal whiskey and bourbon, and 6 of those were in Kentucky, and Jack Daniels was in Tennessee. So you're absolutely correct there. And it was really the cooperages that lobbied Congress during Prohibition that said, hey, we're going to go out of business. This is going to completely shutter if we don't have a reason to continue producing wood barrels. So Congress enacted a law that said, okay, to be bourbon, it has to be put into a brand new, never used white oak barrel. So that's really what saved the cooperage industry and allowed Kentucky to, monopolize, I'll say, the bourbon industry for decades.
But so what you're saying is that there's a plant in Indiana that is manufacturing and distilling probably the majority of the run-of-the-mill type bourbon or whiskey that you would be drinking.
It did for a long time. And then, Kentucky, over the last really 2 decades, the last decade has invested billions into infrastructure to, create these massive industrial complexes that are, there's so much bourbon out there right now that it's actually created a little bit of a surplus for the industry right now.
What happens when you have a surplus like that? Like, does it just get stored?
Well, that's the good news. Yeah. I mean, bourbon is an appreciating product, right? So instead of depreciating over years, it goes up. The problem is you got to have patient money to invest in a product like that, right? So just rough and tumble, let's say it takes $1,000 to produce a bourbon of barrel right now. You've got to sit on that for, at least 4 years to get a healthy return. Now, the good news is that you'll sell that barrel once you put it into a bottle for somewhere between $4,000 or $5,000. But as long as you let it continue to age out into that 10-year, 15, 20-year kind of Pappy Van Winkle, they can demand, a very high premium on those barrels because it sat in the barrel that long.
Yeah, I always kind of wondered why, if there was a necessity for the bourbon to be aged. Obviously, to your point, it's an appreciating, product, and the older it is, the more of a value that it retains. But I didn't actually ever understand that there sometimes is a need for it to sit because there's a surplus. It's you can't sell it.
Well, this is kind of the first time it's really happened. There was a little bit that this took place in the 80s, and then it really got self-corrected pretty quickly. They turned the tap off. I think the difference now has been it's a little bit of a perfect storm because you've had of the big guys that we've been riding this wave for the last decade that bourbon has just grown and grown and grown. Well, it kind of hit the ceiling. At the same time, a couple of years ago, there were a lot of private equity PC firms that went into Kentucky and just laid down tens of millions of dollars and said, here, produce barrels for me. I don't have a label. I don't have a brand. I just believe that bourbon is going to continue to grow forever, and we'll sell it on the secondary market. And over the last 4 or 5 years, the world has changed. COVID was a big part of that. The legalization of marijuana has been a big part of that. RTDs, ready to drink, the High Noons, Trulias of the world. People thought that was going to be kind of a flash in the pan, a Zima. Well, it's not. It's here to stay. And then the biggest, I think, disruptor within our industry in the last few years has been the weight loss drugs that people are now, it's showing they're drinking less as well. So, where are people going to get their fix? It's really a combination of optionality and surplus, right? So there's, in a lot of ways, it resembles the housing bubble of 2008, where you've got so much surplus, so much optionality, and then just this kind of false hope belief that the market will continue to grow forever. That, I don't think it will collapse, but I think that there's going to be a very hard reset over the next few years, and it will primarily impact, small guys like myself, where, also you throw in now these tariffs that everybody's kind of freaking out about, that, the big guys, the Jim Beams, Jack Daniels of the world, they'll be able to pull back, cut price by, 25% or whatever, and they'll trade margin for volume. And that's what I would do if I was them. And I think that, guys like myself, we're not going to be able to cut 25% out of ours. So we have to both have a superior product, a good story, good product, and, just kind of find clever ways to, be innovative with product, but also not completely abandon our core bourbon consumer that's out there.
You talked there about just, the good story. We definitely did a little bit of a left turn to get into more of how the industry sits on whole right now. But I want to go back and continue from where you left off when you were talking about that manufacturing facility. Tell me a little bit more about how you got to where you are today as being one of those artisan distillers that are really kind of on the outskirts of the large major manufacturing firms, but still finding great success in the industry.
For us, at least, it was a lot of bootstrapping, right? We did not have initially millions and millions of dollars to put behind this thing. And we really started this with a couple student loans and some friends and family that believed in it. And from there, we opened our tasting room in 2014. And, we initially went immediately cash flow positive just from our sales there. We waited a year to enter the distribution market. And what we really quickly learned is that in this industry, while I think it looks sexy from the outside, what we're basically, we're a marketing company that happens to make bourbon, right? And if you don't have that component of it and are able to tap into what consumers are looking for, both in the short term and long term, it is very, very hard to survive in this industry because it is so capital intensive and it's so competitive, right? And there are companies that have been around for over 100 years that know this game. They have loyal consumers, and it's very hard to convince someone to switch from a Jim Beam or Jack Daniels and give Hotel Tango a try, not just once, but go back to it and purchase it over and over again.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Any sort of craft brew or craft distillery really has to have such a strong marketing game in order to, overcome the hurdle of being in the small fish in a tank full of sharks. Really, when you talk about like the larger conglomerates that are pushing millions of dollars at their advertising on a daily basis, sometimes it seems daunting. But as I told you when we were first talking, you've done an excellent job with that. I think your marketing is on point, and that's coming from somebody who does that for a living. I think that your website is beautiful. It tells the story. It's got a unique vibe to it, and that's something you got to have for sure to stand out. Like, to your point, what's going to make somebody come to you over and over again when they may be able to buy something that is mass produced, that is a known commodity for sometimes $10, $15 less than what they're spending on you? Why does it make you worth it? It's the question of the why. And the marketing angle, the aspect behind there is like, why is Hotel Tango sexy? Why is it something that is going to make you feel better for the decision? And a lot of that is taste, but I think so much goes into that marketing aspect across all disciplines, whether it be, whiskey, bourbon, it doesn't matter what it is. You're fighting that fight on a daily basis. And that's where the innovation comes in and the key. And that's something that I think you guys are doing really well. So tell me, how did you see that once you got to the tasting room, moving into the distribution? What did you do when you decided to be that marketing team who actually just sold whiskey on the side? How did that come about? And what was the next steps in moving that forward?
Well, we utilize our tasting room as kind of our R&D facility, both from what products we produce, but also how we approach consumers. It is a great kind of in real time focus group laboratory that we're able to get feedback from consumers on the look, the feel, the vibe, right? I mean, a Ford and a Ferrari basically do the same thing. It's just one makes you feel a lot cooler when you're driving it, right? Like,
man,
right?
I love Fords.
Me too. They're great, right? But, it's also the difference between catching a smallmouth bass and a marlin, right? They're both fish, but,
right.
You want to put one on the wall and the other one can maybe get turned back loose. And I think that's what we were able to figure out. And again, the website, the labels, none of that was born day one. A lot of that was, a lot of shifting, pivoting over time to hone in on it. What we found again with the tasting room was we could really identify what worked and what didn't. And, there were some things that absolutely we have stuck with from day one, our core values and how we run the company. But a lot of the things have changed, as simple as the font on our labels to breaking off, so we really have two separate brands under the Hotel Tango label. We have kind of the more serious Hotel Tango bourbon side, and then we have our flavored bourbon side, our Schmallow brand. That's much more fun, playful. It's not as necessarily disciplined. It's more that liberty side of the military that we get to play with.
You touched on the fact that it's iterations over time. And that's one thing that, I posted a TikTok the other day about how you have to just do it and get forward and move the needle a little bit. And being able to iterate through the process is one of those key things that if you are able to do that downstream, the initial product that you put out, look at Mickey Mouse. Look at Mickey Mouse through the years, right? The character that was on Steamboat Willie of the first iteration of Mickey Mouse as opposed to what, my kids watch on the Disney Channel today looks very different. There's an acceptance that comes along with the development of a brand over time by the customer and by the general audience that I think as entrepreneurs and business owners, we get so tied up in trying to think of, it's got to be perfect. I got to put out this thing. It's got to be perfect the first time, that half the time we fail to actually go to market with whatever that idea is or that product is because you're so afraid that it's not going to be perfect. And the reality is that it doesn't have to be. You can iterate on it, right? And I'm guilty of this right now. I'm redoing my company's website. I'm like, it's not ready. It's not ready. After this, Travis, I'm going to go and just push it out because you have to do that. And you have to be able to just accept that it's an ongoing process. Am I right there? Is that kind of the idea that you have?
Yeah, and again, I would say evolved in my process. In the beginning, I was a bull in a china shop. I was all gas, no brakes. We got to go, go, go. And at that point, we were small enough that we could make these very quick, sharp pivots and recover from it. We've gotten to the point now where I've got a great team around me that acts as, my brakes a little bit to say, whoa, we have to think about, we can't just do that. That sounds great. But now there's, really a lot more consideration with going to market, the marketing program that would have to go behind that, what the sales team has, from what they have to go out to actually move the product and just the dollars behind it, right? If you want to be successful, there has to be this plan that accompanies the innovation, right? You could go out and have a great superior product, but sometimes the guys with more money can just drown you and bury you. And a lot of times in this industry, I think that's how it happens, right? There is a lot of copycatting that happens, and the guys with the bigger budget sometimes are able to win because they were able to kind of withstand and push harder in a more meaningful way, even if, you have a superior product or a better story or whatever.
It's staying power. And if if you don't have the cash reserve to be able to last out that time, they do. So they can continue, even if it's a subpar product, they'll be able to push it out further and longer than you would. And so it's a war of attrition at that point, and who's going to be able to last or grow
100%.
market.
Yeah.
Quickly,
our strategy has changed several times over the last 10 years where we've had to go back and retool. For instance, at one point we had over, I think, 12 products in the market. We had a vodka, gin, rum. We had 3 liqueurs. We had 3 different bourbons and our flavored bourbon line. And we have pared that down to today where it's really, our bourbon and our flavored bourbon. And we don't focus on anything else. And part of that is, those other products kind of ran their course. They did what they were supposed to from more of a marketing standpoint to just get the name out. The other side was we learned that those marketing dollars were getting spread so thin across so many products that it was really creating confusion within the marketplace from consumers. What is Hotel Tango? Are you guys a distiller? What exactly is this? So, we've learned that by focusing in, our sales have improved on those products, and people recognize us more for the product that we are focused behind, if that makes sense.
what you're talking about is just the ebbs and flows of scaling and what you have to do. And I think that what you talked about there in the beginning of like, okay, cool, I want to spread and grow and offer as much as you can. Like as an entrepreneur, you think that is maybe the way to go because you're giving more ammunition and you're taking more shots at different targets, right? And you've got an opportunity to be successful with different verticals as you kind of push that out. The other side of that coin that a lot of people don't necessarily see, and what you are talking about, is that if you spread yourself out, you are then taking the amount of time that you have to devote to whatever that is and fractionalizing that across maybe 10, 12 different things. And so you're never going to have 100% to give to each one of those things. It can work, but the more and more that I talk to people in your position, the more clients that I deal with, ultimately like finding the thing that is going to be the front runner is, I see a lot of people kind of scaling back and pulling those verticals back in and really focusing on the things that are going to be the breadwinner for them and whatever their offering is. Because when you spread yourself out so thin, to your point, you have marketing dollars going everywhere, you have time and attention going into all these different angles. It becomes a jack of all trades, master of none situation to where you're mediocre at best at everything, where you can actually constrict and be awesome at three things, right?
Yeah, it's the shotgun versus rifle approach, right? And
right.
Sometimes the shotgun works early on, but as you go forward, it has to become more rifle. Otherwise, if you keep shotgunning it, to your point, you spread yourself out so thin that you don't, at a certain point, you're like, what are we doing? Like, we have so many widgets or so many things that we're producing, we're not doing anything really well. And, it's taken, neither one of those things happens overnight either, right? Like you kind of go down a path and you realize, this is not the right path. We have to go back. And at that point, the boat is so big, it takes a while to turn it back. And now I've learned, I say no a lot more because there's just so many opportunities we have. We've been offered to do a beer, a wine, canned cocktail stuff. And it's like, nope, I appreciate it, but we're going to stick to what we do well, and we're going to keep going down that way. And I've seen other guys, take those risks, and, very few times have I seen it succeed because it ends up becoming a distraction from what you're good at. Well,
so again, you're talking about the scaling strategies of how you're looking to move forward into the next 1, 3, 5 years of the company. And as you're looking at that, so you've constricted everything back. You're sitting really focusing on Schmallow and then the main product. When you look to scale this and hearing kind of the hurdles that you're facing, you have big brand liquors that are constantly beating you down in competitive spaces. You have, opportunities that you're saying no to. Maybe not all of them. You might find some that might be interesting and may want to take a shot at it, or a limited release of that, to allow you to have the creative freedom. What's the plan? I mean, when you think about scaling for Hotel Tango right now, how do you see the next 1, 3, 5 years? And like when you're pushing that, what's your mindset as you're deciding the next steps and you're going in those directions?
Well, some of it is reading the tea leaves, right? There's this, what your plan is and what we can do from a budgetary standpoint. Those are kind of the hard walls. And then within those, there's a little bit of, it gets blurry, right? So, for instance, because there's so much excess capacity out there in the bourbon world right now, part of our strategy is to shrink down our existing production side of the business and outsource some of it, because we cannot make it as well and for the price by partnering with another distillery. Just the overhead of production space, bottling lines, equipment, personnel, like those are very high fixed costs, right? Like to be able to kind of just outsource that to somebody else and get a singular bill versus managing HR and fucking 401k and all that stuff, it becomes a real pain in the ass as a small business guy from that standpoint. But to also not necessarily, in doing that, we're giving up a little bit of our authenticity, a little bit of our story. So we're going to keep, a very small portion of our production, right? But we're not going to try to scale to the size of Jim Beam by investing in millions and millions of dollars of equipment, right? I think that I would, if I had for $1 and I had to put it into marketing or equipment, it's going to marketing every time. Kind of specifically to our products, I think that there is always, in the alcohol world, it's cyclical like everything else, right? So either beer is hot, wine is hot, spirits are hot. And within each one of those categories, there are micro trends. Sometimes IPAs are hot, sometimes red wines are hot, sometimes bourbon is hot. For us, again, we rely heavily on the tasting room, as well as, I pay attention to the industry rags and kind of the trends on each side, each coast, because that's really where things start to become cool and a thing, and then it slowly trickles into the Midwest. So if we can be ahead of that curve,
right?
Absolutely. Again, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, is peanut butter whiskey going to be a thing? I would have said, you're crazy. And now Screwball is a $100 million product by itself, right? The category is somewhere over 250 million or something like that. The number one whiskey in Indiana, which it has been for decades, is Fireball, which and it's not even close.
Do we call that a whiskey?
Yeah. I think you have to. It's a Sazerac product, right, and that's on their one side of their portfolio, but they also have Blanton's on the other, right? So they're playing this. They know what they're doing, obviously, right? Like, so it's not like you can say, oh, shame on them. Fireball is what it is, right?
Right. Playing golf games across the country, since 2010.
Yeah, helping college sophomores realize they don't like cinnamon that much since 1990. It is. But I think, that's where we come in, and we've really figured out that there are certain flavor profiles that can become either a seasonal product or, not necessarily an everyday item, but an LTO that I would also, I kind of point to, the Sam Adams model, where they've got, they're kind of everyday lager, but then they have 4 distinct products that come out every season. They're there for 90 days, and then they're off the shelf until next year. But they sell out of that so fast that it's clockwork. Yeah. They just kind of know that's what they're doing. I foresee that is where all alcohol is going to end up going, because the difference between the consumer 20 years ago and the guy now is 20 years ago, a Budweiser guy was a Budweiser guy. He had it at the baseball game, at dinner, and at the campfire. Now that same guy might be a Budweiser guy at the baseball game, but he's a bourbon guy around the campfire and a high noon guy at the lake, or a marijuana gummy guy, right? So that person has changed both by the season and the experience that they're going to, right? It's not just a beer at every single thing. It's, I want a gummy on the lake, or I want a whatever at the wherever. I think that's what's changing, that people are not as necessarily either brand loyal or as buzz, I guess, the same kind every place they go. And I think that that's what's really changing. And so for us, what we've innovative wise is really the Schmallow, right? It's almost a gateway or a dip your toe in the water kind of product, because I think that bourbon can be intimidating to some folks, particularly women that see it as this hardcore, Mad Men kind of product that, they want to do it, but they also are like, 90 proof with an ice cube seems a little hard to do. Schmallow, it's a little bit lower proof. There's a little bit more flavor in it, and they can still feel like they're part of the good old boy club by drinking it, but also not necessarily overindulging in something that is, a high octane product. From that, we've really created a couple different products with the base of Schmallow. We have a pumpkin spice that's a bourbon that's coming out that did extremely well last year. And we have a partnership with Swiss Miss that we're doing a chocolate Schmallow. Again, these are not everyday, we're not trying to jam it down the throat of retailers. This is LTO stuff where it's in and out for the season and then back off for another, 9 months. And what that does is it creates that want and that pull through, right? So retailers have got a short-term and a long-term memory. If your product goes in there as an LTO and it sells out, they will immediately say, we want it back there next year. If there's one bottle left on the shelf at the end of that LTO period, they're like, man, it did okay. It did all right. And you're like it did pretty well. And they're like, well, we'll see. But if you sell all the way through it and there's this FOMO, psychology piece where they're like, man, we left money on the table last year, that's where they're going to say, well, yeah, we want that and some for this year. We want to make sure that if you guys are only doing X number of cases, that we want X number of cases per store. And we want to make sure that Kroger gets it and, Safeway or whoever doesn't get it. That's kind of this game that those guys play.
That's the game you like to be in too, because then it's like, oh, you really are in the catbird seat at that position.
Again, that doesn't happen very often, and there's no guarantees, right? That particular flavor category is going to last forever. Nothing does. So you have to capitalize on it within, basically a few years. And once that, you can kind of see that bell curve happen, and you want to catch it on the upswing. The other hot flavors that are out there right now that we haven't gone into there's a whipped cream that's doing really well in Nielsen, and pickle. Completely different flavor profiles, completely different products, but for whatever reason, consumers are gravitating to those, and we've just seen high sales in those kind of categories.
I'm a massive pickleback guy. So like the pickle whiskey, I'm here for it. This is my space. I feel comfort in that. The name of the show is Hitting the Mark, and as you can see in my background here, there's a dartboard. I like to think I'm a semi-professional dart player. I've been paid $200 in the past 10 years to play darts. And but one of the things that we do on a Monday night is, I've played for a decade now, and we do shots, and we do a team shot. And the team shot, everybody gets a pickleback. So I don't know when that started or who thought of it. It's phenomenal. But to your point, I don't think that I'd marry whipped cream and whiskey, but, it makes more sense. So
yeah, man. I mean, again, for me, I do my one pickleback a year, and I'm good. And I'll see you next year.
You do the one pickleback a year to remind yourself why you do one pickleback a year, right?
There's other folks that just love it. And again, there's no right or wrong. It's just what the consumer's trends are going toward.
And you got to stay on top of all that and make decisions in a concerted effort that will allow you to do that. And I think it's smart. And when you're talking about, like, as you were saying, like outsourcing some of the production, it gives you a little bit more range too, because if you're not fully committed to your line making a pickleback whiskey, then you can kind of be a little bit more nimble in those decisions and test things out a little bit differently, 100%. Right?
Again, you can't ignore it, right? I mean, this is a big battle space. Right. And, when you're looking out at all of the competition, I've been surprised certainly on the things that have popped up and grown. But I've also been surprised at the things that decline and how rapidly those things kind of go away. And, 10 years ago, Stoli had 40 different flavors of vodka. And now, those have gone away. Like, those aren't on the shelf anymore. You don't see them. And again, retailers have that memory where they're like, we've seen this before. We don't want to get so crazy with everything. And in the alcohol world, traditionally, it has been kind of a good old boy system, right? It's kind of who you know, how long the relationship's been there. And sometimes you can catch a break by, just being in the industry long enough. Those days are kind of gone. At this point, it's Moneyball. They look at Nielsen, they look at hard numbers, they look at last year's sales, and they make their decision based off of that because, shelf space is limited. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard from, retailers that we're trying to sell into, I know that Jim Beam is going to sell. I don't know if Hotel Tango is going to sell. So why should I give that shelf space to you guys versus them? And again, it's really about, in what market we're in. And how we can tell that story, right? And at what time of the year. I mean, Veterans Day is a lot different for us than, Halloween for Jim Beam, right? So I just think that it's kind of, aim small, miss small with smaller craft guys. But again, you really got to be very intentional about where you're going after sales and remembering this is a long game. If you're not planning on next year's sales already, it's probably too late.
You reference yourself as a bull in a china shop when you first started going, but it's apparent to me throughout this conversation and even obviously previously that you're very intelligent and very calculated in what you do. You talked about Moneyball right there just a second ago and how utilizing data to predict future trends or establish a reasoning behind it. I think that I'm going to assume you're also using that data to tell the story to those distributors, and being able to collect and utilize the data that you have is undoubtedly knowing that is crucial information for you, right? Is that something that you're working off on a daily basis to know kind of how best to position the next quarter, the next year, the next holiday season? What part does that play in terms of your sales strategy in moving that out?
I mean, that is the sales strategy at this point.
Sure.
We're not by any means huge, but I think we have a respectable name within the industry. Most folks have either heard of Hotel Tango or can, do a pretty quick search and see, okay, these guys are legit. They've been around a while. But beyond that, it is really on us to show the movement of product, both to distributor, to retail, and through the register. All three of those are so important because there's bottlenecks within each layer there. And if it's not moving through chain accounts, if it's not moving through registers, there's going to be a clog somewhere. And they are aware of that, right? So they want to know what your sales were last year, but they also want to know velocity. Is there a ton of your product sitting on someone's warehouse floor that hasn't moved and is collecting dust? And retailers and distributors have wised up to that. They know now that there are ways to create false positives within sales numbers by some brands. And what they do not want to do is, bring in a product that is not going to move. That's the end game, right? They'll give you a chance one time. And if it sits on their floor for more than 90 days, that's going to be a problem. And you're going to have a hard time getting a rebuy. So yes, we pay very close attention to Nielsen, NIQ data, all of our distributors that we can get information from. It really is a Moneyball game. And if you're not looking at that, the retailers and distributors are, and they expect you to do the same thing.
It's interesting too, because that's such a faceless part of it, because it's just data, it's numbers, right? It doesn't take into consideration your story or your core values. When you're working in that scaling process, how do you stay true to what your core values were and your decision to start this and everything behind Hotel Tango in the first place? Like, what's the methodology that you use for that?
Well, we keep it simple. We have 4 core values: discipline, spirit, straightforward, and gung-ho. Like, that's kind of our true north. Like, we want to be disciplined. We want to be straightforward. We tell people how it is. We want to be spirited, playful, and have fun. This is, after all, the alcohol industry. We're not curing cancer. We're creating good times for people. And gung-ho, we want to work in partnership with our distributors or retailers, and internally we want to work with each other in a positive, proactive way. I mean, for me, those are all values that were directly taken from the military, the Marine Corps, and that it kind of transcends, right? Like, they're easy talking points. It's easy to put up on a poster, but if you're not utilizing those and falling back to those on a daily basis and kind of letting that guide what you're doing, it's really easy to get distracted with other stuff. And I think that, we've had several partners over the years tell us how much they appreciate that we have those and that we stick to them. It's obviously, for instance, it's better to give someone bad news fast than it is to let it hang out there. And I think, we both make ourselves do that, but we also kind of expect that from our distributor partners. And because it's a huge piece, right? We can't sell directly to retailers in any market. We have to have this, unholy 3-way relationship with our distributors. And if you're not, uncomfortably transparent and truthful with them, things can get sideways really quick. And, you want to have those guys behind you at all times.
It is a weird relationship, right? And for people that aren't in the industry or have never had to deal with a distributor relationship, you're really placating all the needs and wants of the distributor, but they're not really your customer. You still have to then reach out and talk to the end user, the consumer, and really also placate to their needs and wants. So you're doing double duty, really. Convincing a distributor that they need to bring you on and push you out to all these different areas. And then also you have to convince the consumer to purchase and drink the whiskey as well.
I would say
right?
triple, because you got to remember there's a retailer in there too. So we're selling to the distributor, the retailer,
sure.
and then finally the consumer. Again, that's why between investing in infrastructure and marketing, you got to have the marketing. And you're absolutely right. So we really have to sell a bottle of Hotel Tango 2 or 3 times before it gets to someone's lips. And again, it's way better to have those distributor and retail partners behind you and want to be on your team to help you grow, to build your brand. Because if you don't, they're just going to say, well, Jim Beam and Jack Daniels, they keep the lights on for us, and it's easier to just, make sure we sell their stuff and not have to worry about Hotel Tango. So again, it is a very relationship based industry. And if you burn a bridge, people remember, and people don't usually leave this industry. It's a pretty small group of folks that kind of make big things happen, and you want to stay on everybody's good side. Be nice to everybody.
I love that about the industry. I love that it's relationship based. I do everything that I do 100% relationship based. I think life is better when you can trust the people you work with. For you to be in a industry that is so small and wanting to develop those relationships, the distributors, the retailers, like when you're doing that extra bit and going that extra mile to really make sure that they're taken care of, even if there is that one bottle of the limited time offering that's on the shelf, I think that those people remember who you are and what you're doing and the effort that you're putting in. I would say, my thing is, when it comes to failure, right? Everybody's going to fail. Everybody's going to have some sort of mess up, or we're human. We screw up. It's not about how, what you did to get there or the fact that you did it. I don't judge people on that. I judge people on what they do to fix the scenario, fix the issue, how they get back to good, because that, I think, is a true window into the person that you're working with, right? And I think that is the distillate of a relationship. It's not about when the times are good. It's when times are tough or times are hard, what that interaction really looks like. And I think from your standpoint, going up against big national, international conglomerates, you have to be super transparent and super relationship focused and willing to do whatever you can. And you want that back from the people that you're giving your all to, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
do you feel like that's something that you have found, like your distributors? Do you feel like that is a challenge for you? Or do you feel like that is something that you've been lucky to come across and have got some great distributors that reciprocate that?
I mean, I think the industry has changed, and that, craft has, it's grown from 1% to 5% of the overall industry or something like that. And that's not a small number for those guys. It's a real number, but I think that it's hard for them, shifting, where they had been dealing with the same people for basically their entire career, 40, 50 years, right? Where I've just dealt with Bob at Jim Beam, and that's the guy, and I know I count on him. So to bring in somebody new and craft and small that's never done this and never had to move a case of whiskey from my back garage door to, somewhere across state lines, it's not an easy logistical feat to do that and stay in compliance with all the, state laws and regulation. So I think part of it is just, it would have been easier for them to just stick with the big guys and not even mess with craft. So I think that, what makes a big difference for those guys is how much of the heavy lifting we are going to do and how fast we can adapt to that. I mean, obviously, the easier I can make it on our distributor partners to get that case from A to B, that builds trust, right? And that builds legitimacy, I guess, that, we can both do the marketing piece, but we can also do the admin piece and the behind the, the non-sexy fun stuff piece, right? That is so crucial to making sure that a product gets to not just to A to B, But then it gets to the right retailer and the right spot on the shelf of that retailer's store, right? You don't want to be bottom next to the, bottom tier stuff. You want to be right up there in between, Jim Beam, Blanton's, and, the big guys, right? Like that's where you want your shelf space. So I think, again, it's this trust building that never ends, right?
And I think that you go above and beyond that, not only with the distributors, but one of the main things that you like to do is work in the community too, and kind of go from a grassroots effort backwards, ground up. With that, your company is doing a lot to support community. It's doing a lot to give back. Can you tell me a little bit what you guys are working with in terms of like working with veterans and how that has like maybe a local and a national impact for how you guys are actually being distributed and viewed on a national scale?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot of, obviously our philanthropic piece is really geared toward veterans. We try to keep it as local as possible. I think that it does the biggest impact that way. We have done some things with Folds of Honor in the past, but we really have a group called Helping Veterans and Family. It's a local group that helps veterans get off the street, get some kind of lets them know what their resources are through both the VA and state level programs. They do housing, clothing, they have a food pantry, and it's based here in Indianapolis. So, selfishly, I get to see those good works actually happening in my town. I mean, we've raised, at this point, tens, if not, hundreds of thousands of dollars for those folks. And, again, my worry is that, you donate to one of these big nonprofit groups and it just kind of goes into the universe and you never really see where your dollars impact people. Here, I mean, you see it every day. And for us, that's the biggest win I think we can do is impact our local community first.
If there's one thing to be selfish about in life, that's probably a good thing. Being selfish about being able to help people is a good thing. Let me ask you, if somebody's watching this podcast though, and may have an opportunity that isn't the large scale organizations, is that something you maybe would be willing to entertain?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they reach out to you?
I mean, again, everything's, we have a budget for, donating to veteran golf outings and to other things. So I would just say, the sooner you can get it to us, the better. We have a lot of people that ask, hey, can you donate a case for next week? And it's like, we've already allocated out our stuff, so, if you can get it 30 or 60 days or even sooner, that helps us just kind of budget for those things. But we obviously always want to do whatever we can.
Yeah. And that's good. That's wonderful. It's a valiant thing. It's very good to be able to give back and stay true to those core values as you're trying to grow and scale.
So it's just been, a pretty wild 10 years. Some days it feels like it's going so fast, and other days it's, the grind, where it's just figuring out today's problems.
Of which you can be sure there will always be a problem. Yeah. It doesn't matter what day it is or how big it is.
Yeah, there's a toilet plug somewhere in this building that I'm going to have to address by the end of the day. I'm sure. I
love being the plumber too. I'm actually the chief electrician, chief plumber, chief exterminator. I've been through all that.
That's every day, man. That does not change in a small business.
All right. Well, Travis, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And, if you see Hotel Tango, pick up a bottle and tell your friends.
I think we can make that happen. Man, what a conversation. From the battlefield to the boardroom, Travis Barnes has built something truly incredible with Hotel Tango. A brand that's not just about great spirits, but about discipline, resilience, and a mission bigger than business. If you want to check out Hotel Tango's lineup, head over to hoteltangodistillery.com or find them at your favorite liquor store. And if you're in the military, you'll be happy to know that their spirits are stocked on over 120 bases nationwide. Now, if you're listening to this thinking, I need to step up my brand game, whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, or building something worth talking about, I'd love to help. My team at Brand Builder works with businesses to create marketing strategies that actually move the needle. If you're ready to make an impact, let's talk. Shoot me a message at dustin@brandbuilderpromotions.com or catch me on LinkedIn or Instagram. And hey, if you got value out of this episode, do me a favor. Hit that follow button, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Every share helps this show grow, and I appreciate you being a part of this journey. That's it for today. So until next time, keep building, keep growing, and as always, keep hitting the mark.